I never imagined my own driveway would become a battlefield. One morning, I found a violation notice from the HOA claiming my driveway broke some obscure rule. What they didn't realize? That very driveway was my invention, and the patent had just been approved. They picked the wrong fight. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 6 peaceful years, paid every HOA due on time, kept my lawn trimmed, followed every guideline to the letter. I was the kind of resident associations dream of. Then out of nowhere, I received a notice. My driveway was in violation of community aesthetics. No explanation, no warning, just a fine and a threat of further action. At first, I thought it was some clerical error, but the more I looked into it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about rules, it was a personal move. The HOA president, Karen, yes, that kind of Karen, had taken a sudden interest in my property. Petty complaints, passive-aggressive emails, photos taken without permission. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was picking a target. And unfortunately for her, she chose the wrong one. Because while she was trying to play neighborhood dictator, I had quietly been laying the groundwork for something far more powerful than she could ever imagine. This wasn't just my driveway. It was my invention. And it was protected. It started with a $100 fine for what they called reflective materials. I stared at the notice in disbelief. My driveway had a slightly glossy finish, engineered that way for temperature control and water resistance. It wasn't just legal, it was cutting edge. I designed it myself. But to the HOA, or rather to Karen, that made me a target. Then came the parking threats. Apparently my vehicle, a standard SUV parked in my own driveway, was non-compliant. When I asked for clarification, they dodged. No clear citations. No rule references. Just warnings and more fines. I started to see the pattern. This wasn't about community standards. This was a campaign. Karen, the HOA president, was the ringleader. She strutted through the neighborhood like she was running a private fiefdom. Clipboard in one hand, tape measure in the other, constantly inspecting my property. At first, I tried to be civil. I responded to her letters. I attended HOA meetings. I even offered to explain the technology behind the driveway, how it was permeable, eco-friendly, and even helped with snowmelt. But she wasn't interested. Her eyes didn't see innovation. They saw defiance. And Karen didn't like defiance. She began escalating. I'd catch her on my property line, snapping photos of my car, my lights, my garage. Then, noise complaints started trickling in from neighbors I barely knew. One claimed my central AC unit was too loud during the summer. Another complained about a delivery driver honking once in front of my house. The stories were flimsy, easily disproven, but they kept coming. That's when I realized it wasn't just Karen. She was organizing people, instructing them. I later overheard her bragging about rallying the community to take care of the problem house. I was the problem house. I started documenting everything. Every letter, every fine. I installed cameras around the property. It didn't take long to catch her, leaning over my hedges, peeking through my garage windows, walking up my private driveway. One afternoon, I confronted her. She said she was just checking on compliance, with the smugness of someone who thought they were untouchable. But I could see something behind her eyes. She wasn't checking anything. She was trying to provoke me. What made it all so rich was the hypocrisy. Karen's own driveway was a mess. The pavers were cracked and mismatched, and her lighting? Strips of cheap LED rope that changed color every 5 seconds, completely against the HOA guidelines. But of course, no violation notices for her. She was above it all. She made the rules and bent them at will. She thought I'd just roll over, that I'd pay the fines, repaint the driveway, and fall in line like the rest. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just some homeowner with a fancy driveway. I was the inventor of it. I held the patent. The very thing she was attacking was legally mine, protected at the federal level. But I didn't strike back immediately. I waited. I let her keep going, building a pattern of harassment. I logged every message, every unfair citation. I even got witness statements from 2 neighbors who confessed that Karen had pressured them into making complaints. The longer she pushed, the stronger my case became. But it wasn't just about legal leverage. This had become personal, not because she was targeting me, but because she thought she could get away with it. Karen wielded the HOA like a weapon, punishing people who didn't conform to her vision of control. And if she'd do this to me, how many others had she bullied into silence? That thought kept me up at night, so I shifted gears from defense to offense. I brought in a real estate attorney, someone with experience in HOA overreach and property law. We reviewed everything: her notices, her trespassing, the selective enforcement, and most importantly, the violation she issued over my driveway, which directly referenced features protected under my patent. It was a goldmine. She wasn't just being vindictive, she was breaking federal law. Still, I kept quiet. Let her think she was winning. Let her keep sending fines and letters, parading around the block with her tape measure like a sheriff in an old western. Because every move she made only added weight to what was coming next. And when the moment came, I'd make sure she felt every ounce of it. They say power reveals character. But in Karen's case, it revealed her weakness, her need to control, to dominate, to silence anyone who dared to step outside her fragile rules. She thought she was untouchable, insulated by her title and her circle of yes-men. She never saw me coming, and soon she'd learn. You don't start a war over a driveway unless you're ready for the ground to shake beneath you. Karen thought she was chipping away at a driveway. In reality, she was poking the foundation of something far bigger than she could grasp. You see, this wasn't any ordinary slab of concrete she was trying to regulate. My driveway was the product of 5 years of research, testing, and late nights hunched over design specs. It was made from a proprietary blend of smart materials, permeable to reduce water runoff, embedded with a low-voltage heating grid to melt snow in the winter, and lined with a self-cleaning surface layer that broke down grime under sunlight. A sleek, efficient system that merged environmental science and modern engineering. I didn't just build it, I invented it. 3 weeks before I received my first violation from the HOA, I received something else, something far more powerful. A certified letter from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office confirming the approval of my patent. I was now the legal owner of a piece of technology that could revolutionize suburban infrastructure. And Karen had no idea. Every fine she issued, every complaint she filed, every written notice accusing me of non-compliant materials was, legally speaking, an attempt to restrict and penalize federally protected intellectual property. She wasn't just overstepping her bounds as HOA president, she was wading into federal territory. And that opened the door for me to do something most people in an HOA nightmare could only dream of. Fight back with actual legal teeth. I remember sitting across the table from my attorney, sliding a copy of the violation notice toward him. He skimmed it, then looked at the patent portfolio I'd brought along. His eyes lit up like he'd just found a buried treasure. You do realize, he said, this isn't just harassment anymore. This could be construed as an attempt to obstruct or defame a registered patent. That's serious. You could sue the HOA for damages. And if we can show intent, Karen could be personally liable. Intent wasn't hard to prove. Not with her written complaints, the video evidence of her snooping on my property, the consistent and disproportionate targeting. Not to mention, I'd even offered more than once to present the design to the board. She refused, flat out, told me she didn't have time for DIY nonsense. DIY nonsense. She called my patented smart infrastructure system DIY nonsense. But here's the twist. The moment that patent was approved, it created a legal shield around my work, a force field Karen never saw. And the more she tried to control it, the deeper she stepped into a legal trap of her own making. I prepared everything, filed all the documentation. My lawyer drafted a cease and desist order with attached damages, citing federal protection of intellectual property and wrongful interference. Then we prepared a formal countersuit against the HOA, with Karen named personally for abuse of authority and targeted harassment. Still, I waited. I wanted the perfect moment. That moment came at the next HOA board meeting. Karen, as always, was seated at the head of the table, already smugly flipping through violation logs when I walked in. I handed each board member a copy of the patent, the legal analysis, and the cease and desist. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply explained, line by line, how every violation they had issued was not only invalid, but legally actionable. The room went dead quiet. Karen tried to interrupt, tried to mock the technicalities, but by then it was too late. One of the board members, clearly blindsided, asked if this could bankrupt the association. My lawyer responded calmly, "If pursued fully, yes. And Ms. Karen here, as acting president, may bear personal responsibility." You could feel the panic set in. Karen's eyes darted around the table, suddenly realizing she was no longer in control. Her allies were distancing themselves. Her authority, built on fear and arbitrary rule, was crumbling. The power she once held over me had evaporated in an instant. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't broken a single rule. I simply outsmarted her. Because while she was focused on making my life miserable, I was building something untouchable. That driveway she tried so hard to tear down, it turned out to be the foundation of her undoing. And me? I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was the inventor, the patent holder, the one with legal firepower in a fight Karen never should have started. The HOA wasn't ready for this kind of war, but I was. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. sharp, but I arrived 10 minutes early, just enough time to watch Karen settle into her throne at the head of the table, smug as ever, clipboard in hand, glasses perched at the tip of her nose, flipping through papers like she was preparing for war. Only this time, she had no idea the battlefield had shifted beneath her feet. Behind me, my attorney walked in, carrying a thick black binder, 200 pages of pure ammunition, legal documentation, dated correspondence, photographic evidence, patent filings, timestamps, and statutory codes outlining every infraction she and her HOA loyalists had committed. It wasn't just a dossier, it was a reckoning. I sat down calmly across from her and placed the binder on the table with a dull thump. The sound alone turned heads. Karen looked up, feigning boredom. "We're here to address your ongoing violations," she began, clearly expecting another round of objections, maybe a plea, maybe compliance. Instead, I opened the binder and slid the first few pages toward her. "This," I said, "is a federally approved patent for the smart driveway system installed on my property, approved 3 weeks before you issued your first violation." She blinked. "This," I continued, turning another section, "is a breakdown of your repeated and documented attempts to fine, penalize, and publicly disparage that property in direct violation of U.S. patent protection laws. And this," I said, flipping to the final section, "is a formal claim for damages. You fine me $1,200. Under federal statute, that's considered interference with protected intellectual property. The penalties for that start at $2.3 million. For a moment, all she could do was stare. That polished, controlled expression she always wore cracked. She opened her mouth, then shut it. Around the table, other board members, previously nodding sheep to her orders, suddenly looked wide-eyed, uneasy, whispering to each other under their breath. Karen reached for the binder with a shaky hand, flipping through it, probably hoping to find a loophole, a flaw in the armor. But I'd left none. Every move she made had been calculated against her. Every fine, every letter, every visit logged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced with federal law. "You can't be serious," she finally muttered. My lawyer didn't flinch. "We're very serious," he said, "and unless this board wishes to escalate this to court, you'll drop all outstanding violations, issue a formal apology, and resign from your position immediately." Silence. You could hear the air leave the room. Karen turned to the other board members for backup, but they avoided her gaze. One even slid his chair back slightly. Another cleared his throat and said, "I think we need to consider the legal implications here. This is substantial." Substantial didn't even begin to cover it. By the time the vote was called, it was nearly unanimous. Not only were the fines against me officially revoked, but the entire board moved to disband pending re-election. Karen sat motionless as the motion passed, her authority evaporating one vote at a time. A dictator with no throne, no army, and suddenly no cover. But I wasn't done. In the final moments of the meeting, I pulled one more document from my briefcase, a notice to inspect her driveway. According to the HOA's own code, her lighting and pavers had been in violation for over a year. "As the outgoing president," I said, "you'll be expected to comply with the same standards you enforced." Her jaw clenched. She'd spent months harassing me for a driveway she didn't understand, all while flaunting the very rules she claimed to uphold. Now it was her turn to face them. The following week, the neighborhood was buzzing. Karen's beloved lights came down. The pavers were ripped out. Her title was gone, her influence shattered, her reputation in ruins. And me? I became something else entirely, not just a homeowner, not just an inventor, but a quiet storm that reminded the entire block what happens when you weaponize authority against the wrong person. The most satisfying part? I never raised my voice. I didn't fight her with noise or outrage. I fought her with truth, precision, and patience. Let her bury herself in paperwork and pride, then brought the whole structure down with one signature and a single sentence. They say the pen is mightier than the sword. In this case, a well-timed patent beat them both. Turns out the smartest move I ever made wasn't inventing the driveway. It was letting them think they had the upper hand, while I quietly paved the way beneath them, with something they could never touch. Legal concrete, set, sealed, and irreversible. With the HOA dissolved and Karen dethroned, life finally felt normal again. My driveway, once the target of ridicule, was now being studied by engineers and sustainability experts. Emails poured in from universities, tech firms, even city planners asking about the design. What began as a neighborhood dispute had become a blueprint for the future. But just when I thought it was over, something unexpected happened. A plain envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a grainy photo of Karen standing on the porch of another house in the neighborhood. Scribbled in red ink at the bottom were 6 words. "She's not done. Watch your neighbor." I found out later that Karen had been quietly inserting herself into another HOA in a nearby development. This time her sights were set on a disabled veteran who'd been building a wheelchair-accessible garden, something she claimed violated aesthetic standards. That's when I knew the fight wasn't over. So if you thought this story was wild, just wait. Drop your own HOA horror stories in the comments and hit that subscribe button because HOA Nightmares Volume 2 is coming. And trust me, it gets even darker.